Hello guys, it's Chumas returning another Bakugan video. This time, it's finally happening, the BakuTech tier list. I've been planning this video for like 5 years at this point, I just haven't made it yet. Kind of a good thing, because I feel like my rankings are a lot better now, but yeah, it's finally time to do this video. So I'm going to try and keep this video moving. I do a whole playlist of BakuTech reviews if you want to know more about certain Bakugan, and I have been making more discussions and talking more about Bakugan in general, so there is quite a bit of extra information on my channel about Bakugan, but I don't want to be here for 4 hours, you probably don't want to be here for 4 hours, so I just figured I'll try and keep things moving as fast as I can. Before we get to the tier list though, I do have to go through some ground rules. First up, I'm basing this in Gachi format. Gachi format was a more popular format later in BakuTech, and it does not have ability cards, so basically cards aren't really going to be taken into account. Now there might be a stray gate card mentioned, but for the most part, they are just going to be ignored. I'm also only counting actual BakuTech Bakugan, so like the new Vestrea re-releases, like the couple Sky Raiders that came out in BakuTech are not being counted, it's just the original BakuTech Bakugan. Also, I will be treating different systems a little bit differently. For example, the Convert system, I am allowing max potential Bakugan. So basically, if a Bakugan has the means for 4 metal pieces, but comes with all plastic, it can use 4 metal pieces. As far as the bind system goes, I'm only going to go over base binds though, because if I did every bind, we'd be here forever. And for Bakugan armors, it will be kind of a mix. I will allow metal soul pieces, but the actual armor pieces for the arms will be, again, just kind of the base versions, because again, we'd be here forever otherwise. I'm also not going over G-Power variants that much. I might mention them if they are relevant, but for the most part, I don't think it's worth getting into each G-Power variant and talking about the G-Power of every single Bakugan, because most Bakugan and BakuTech aren't meant to be G-Power battlers. They do G-Power battle, obviously, but unless a Bakugan specifically has some kind of G-Power battling capability that is really good, then I probably won't mention it. And finally, of the 9 tiers here, they are roughly ordered. The higher you go, the more a position means, but for like C tier or B tier, for example, the tiers are pretty rough. One Bakugan being above another Bakugan doesn't mean a whole lot. However, if a Bakugan is high in B tier, for example, and then another one is low in B tier, the higher one's probably going to be better than the lower one. But single position differences don't matter as much. So with all of that out of the way, let's just go ahead and get started with the tier list. Starting off with F tier. F tier is basically for any Bakugan that is absolutely abysmal and you're basically actively trying to lose by using it. Fortunately, there's only one single Bakugan in F tier, that is MacLeod. This is it. As you can see, MacLeod is very tall, has no metal, this thing has no means of attack. There's no strong spring to make this thing any good either. Defensively, it just falls over, it doesn't occupy enough of the card, there's nothing else going for this thing. It doesn't have any good G-Power battling capabilities either. This thing is just genuinely terrible, and I had to give it its own tier, it is that bad. Moving on to E tier. E tier is for Bakugan that are really bad, and you're probably not going to win using them. It's pretty similar to F tier, but MacLeod is just so terrible I had to give it its own tier. But starting off this tier, we have Gus Burnin. Gus Burnin isn't very good, despite the feet looking like soul pieces, they are not. This thing has 0 attack potential. Only thing you could even try to argue for this thing is double stands, but even then it's not the best. Defensively it does nothing, it has no metal. It's not big. It's a bit taller so it can fall over as well, but it's not as bad as MacLeod. It's just Bakugan that exists and really just does absolutely nothing. Next up we have Shinaz-Chi. Shinaz-Chi actually could have been good. This thing doesn't have any attack potential, but it could have been decent for defense. It's not that small. I mean, it's not big, but if these parts could have been a little bigger and had cross pieces, this thing could have actually been at least an okay defensive Bakugan. Maybe could have had a little attack potential as well, but unfortunately it is just plastic. It's not really big enough. Again, it doesn't do anything. It's at least lower to the ground, but still not very good overall. Now we have Warcry, potentially one of the most frustrating Bakugan in the entire line. This thing could have had a little bit of attack potential with these parts here, being, cross pieces, and it's clearly wide enough to potentially have some use as a defensive Bakugan. Problem: these aren't actually cross pieces. Why not? I don't know. This could have at least given it something to do, but it's all plastic, so you don't really get much out of this. Unless you have a crazy gimmick like some of the 36mm Bakugan, you really want to have metal for any Bakugan. Or at least the means to have metal. Or potentially even rubber depending on the Bakugan. So not having it is a massive detriment, and that is why Warcry is so bad. And for the top of E tier we have Haggard Aguma. Hagridaguma is a weird one. This actually does have cross pieces on the hands here, which is pretty nice. So it does have a slight amount of attack potential because of that. And again, it's wide, has a defensive gimmick as when you press this in, it's meant to catch Bakugan. So it has stuff going for it. The problem is this button. This button sticks out when you try to roll and is just really frustrating to deal with. This Bakugan wants to roll straight because it wants to use its gimmick. But you can't really do that properly, so it doesn't get to use its gimmick properly. Also, the gimmick isn't even that good to begin with. And it's not like it has enough metal to really make up for any other shortcomings. So you're left with a Bakugan that kind of does the bare minimum, with a gimmick that doesn't do a whole lot, and really bad rolling issues. Because of that, I don't like this thing very much at all. I debated putting this thing in D tier, but I still think overall it's bad enough to warrant E tier. And yeah, E tier is another pretty small tier. There's a lot of Bakugan that are at least usable, so let's see some at least marginally improved Bakugan. Now we have a D tier. D tier Bakugan aren't really terrible, it's just that there's no reason to use them over anything else. So they're kind of just caught in no man's land. There's only a few of these as well, but let's just go ahead and go through them. First up is Twin Dobru. Twin Dobru does have 2 cross pieces, which is helpful. Also has 2 modes, a defense mode and this attack mode here. The defense mode is pretty bad. Like, as a defense Bakugan, it's actually kind of terrible. But it does have a low G function, which is nice. However, any other low G Bakugan is the same or just better, so doesn't get any points from that either, really. The attack form is okay, but the problem is it's inconsistent use because it is a double-sided Bakugan. So you have a mid-attacker, a bad defender, with some low G setups, I guess, and you don't really get consistency out of it. Yes, you can learn magnet positioning to kind of manipulate which mode you're going to get, but it doesn't really matter here because you'd want more force in this attack form. So really, you'd only be going for defense consistently, and when there's just better and easier low G Bakugan to use, this thing is just kind of worthless, unfortunately. Now we have Gigan Torres. Gigan Torres actually has 2 soul pieces and 1 cross piece. 3 metal pieces is actually pretty good. The problem is that this thing is just very tall, it's not big either, so it's mainly used as an attacker. I don't really like the metal distribution on this thing either, and again, it can fall over pretty easily, so I'm not really big on this thing. And while 3 metal pieces is definitely nice, a lot of the good attackers have at least 4 as well and don't have this height issue, so for me, I don't think it's ever really worth using, which is why I have it pretty low in D tier. Now we have Zack Jaguar. This thing does have 2 cross pieces, which does what you need for an attacker, just not that well. It does have a bit of pop-up force with how it opens, but having some pop-up force with some metal, it doesn't really do a whole lot. There's just better options than this thing, so you really don't need to use this one. Now we have Kotanger. I don't really know what they were going for this one. I mean, you got 2 cross pieces here. That's nice, I guess, but beyond that, this thing just kind of exists. The outside of this thing is very smooth, which is cool. I guess I can give you some interesting rolling stuff, kind of, but not really. In terms of attack, again, you got 2 metal pieces, so there's a little bit there, I guess, but beyond that, defensively, it doesn't do a whole lot. It's also taller. The metal is higher up as well if you use metal. So this Bakugan just doesn't do a whole lot. There's just better things to use instead of Kotanger. Now we have Flame Eagle. Flame Eagle is a weird Bakugan. It does have 2 metal pieces, which is nice. They're actually in a spot that's pretty good, kind of in this downward way, which is nice, but it doesn't do anything else. This would actually be decent for defense, but they don't quite touch the ground, unfortunately, so you can't really use rubber cross pieces there either, and there's just not enough here to really make it worth anything. As an attacker, it just has 2 pieces, so it doesn't do enough. Nothing really pops out in any meaningful way. It just exists. It's just a very okay Bakugan that isn't really worth using. Now we have Killer Volca. Killer Volca does have 2 potential metal pieces on it, which is nice. The shape is decent. Also, when you press in one of these parts here, the tail will drop, which is pretty okay. It's more plastic touching the ground, which gives it a little bit of extra defense. It's an okay sized Bakugan. It can be used as a defender, but it doesn't do quite enough. If the tail had a cross piece on it, and especially if that piece touched the ground, then this could actually be something, but unfortunately that's just not the case. And unfortunately, by the time one of these pieces is actually hit, I don't know how much the tail as is really going to do. So you just have a very okay defensive Bakugan that is just really outclassed by most other things. And at the top of D tier, we have a potentially controversial one, that being Agile. I don't think Agile is very good personally. Now, some people talk about this being a really good double stand Bakugan, and also the fact that, well, when you pick it up, it automatically closes, which has some solid utility there. But there's plenty of other Bakugan that are really easy to close and also slot into small spaces pretty well. Technically, this does it the best, but those you usually get more utility out of. So is going all in on a double stand Bakugan the move that has nothing else going for it? In my opinion, no. It also has a G-Power wheel, making it highly inconsistent for G-Power battles. It can get 680, which isn't really that crazy. Everything else just kind of mid. And you do have a 200 G form, which is good for low G steps, but when you're going, 1 and 6 for that potential, it's a little hard to use that consistently. I just don't think this thing is worth a slot on a deck. There's better Bakugan to use if you need something to slot into a small space. And some of them also just have more interesting rolling patterns with how, cross pieces could be set up. So this thing isn't very good and does finish off D tier. And now we have C tier. C tier Bakugan aren't great, but they're at least okay. While I wouldn't recommend any of these outright, depending on your collection or how much you're willing to spend, some of these are actually pretty decent options. Depending on the deck you're trying to make, especially if you're trying to go with one attribute for some reason, or you just want a certain style of deck, then again, depending on prices, I think some of these are at least okay options to use. First up, we got Grand Panzer, the lowest of C tier. Grand Panzer is interesting because it was actually supposed to be for defense, but it's kind of terrible for defense. It can fall over pretty easily if hit from, direct angles, which is a little bit unfortunate, and it is very small, so as you'll come to see, most defense Bakugan have to have at least a decent bit of occupancy to actually work. This doesn't. That said, you still do have 2 cross pieces and then these 4 smaller metal pieces, which does give this thing a decent bit of weight, so you can use this as an attacker. It's just not a great attacker, but it works well enough, and can at least be a Subterra attack option, I guess. But yeah, it's nothing too special. Next up, we got Gallo. Gallo also has 2 cross pieces on the head and on the tail. This is an interesting Bakugan because it does have rubber cross pieces. Unfortunately, Gallo isn't really good enough for defense to actually make use of these, but it is a good Bakugan to pick up because you do want these rubber cross pieces for some other Bakugan. They actually do have some use, just not on Gallo. That said, Gallo does have a little bit of attack use because the position of the cross pieces does actually make it pretty decent, because it kind of makes a straight ring around the kind of center of the Bakugan here, which can help to roll straight. The problem is there are other Bakugan that can do this and also do it better, so unfortunately rolling straight doesn't save it, but I will at least allow it to scrape into C tier because it has that going for it. Next is Nata Nagina. Nata Nagina does have 2 soul pieces, which is nice. It's mainly a defensive Bakugan, which is a little bit awkward, but it does have this really long tail, which does give it some occupancy, which, again, it's not great, but if you just need something for occupancy and this is an option that you have, then it's usable, just not ideal, but again, it's something. Next up we have Glide, which also has 2 soul pieces. It's just kind of bulky. Unfortunately, it does have more weight on the top, which isn't ideal, but again, it's still bulky, it can be defensive, it's an okay size as well. Again, it's just kind of a Bakugan to throw out for defense if it's what you got, so it at least has a little bit of use like that. Next is Van Falco. Van Falco is a really weird one to rank. It doesn't really do much in the way of defense, but because it has such a long tail, it can occupy a bit more of the card, which is nice, I guess, but the main thing is having 2 cross pieces back here. So it does do a little bit for attack. Also, the tail opens up with a decent bit of strength, which can allow it to pop forward a bit, adding to its attack potential. The problem with Van Falco is that this just isn't better than any Bakugan with 4 metal pieces, in my opinion, so I'm leaving it in C tier. It's still decent, but not ideal, I would say. Speaking of Bakugan with 4 metal pieces, we have Gravity Gnome. Gravity Gnome does have the potential to have 4 metal pieces with having 2 soul pieces and 2 cross pieces. But there are two problems with Gravity Gnome that keep it out of B tier like all of those Bakugan. First up, it is quite tall, and with two cross pieces this high up, it can fall over pretty easily. But the bigger problem is that when you close it, it has this little bit of an extra like plastic ridge here, which is really annoying. It doesn't destroy the Bakugan when trying to roll it, but it is still a slight inconvenience, and I would much rather just not have that inconvenience when trying to roll a Bakugan. Pair that with the weight distribution being a bit bad once it's on the field, I think it's enough to hold it back to C tier instead of B tier like a lot of other Bakugan like it. Next is GIF Jinryu. GIF Jinryu is a weird Bakugan. At first glance, this thing seems like it actually be pretty good for defense. You have the two cross pieces here, and it is a very big Bakugan. It covers a pretty good amount of the card. It's also very bulky looking, so this thing actually has some merit to it. Except it doesn't. I almost think its best use is as a kind of okay attacker with a bit of extra bulk, which isn't really a good thing. The problem with GIF Jinryu is that all of the opening parts are actually pretty high off the ground. This means that the head, arms, feet, they don't actually do a whole lot. I mean, this is too hard to block anything, and yeah, these parts are just higher up, so you aren't really getting much defense out of GIF Jinryu. If these were lower, that's a different story. This thing would actually be a bit of a monster. And even if it was somewhere in between, it'd still be at least like a B tier Bakugan. But with them being as high as they are, I just don't think it's a very good Bakugan. Next up we got Ken Panzer. Ken Panzer is kind of a defensive Bakugan. You got the two cross pieces, one here and one here. The problem though with Ken Panzer is that it's just not very big. I mean, having one cross piece on the Bakugan itself on the back, and then having the one kind of anchoring itself down, it's actually pretty nice. It's just, again, it's not quite big or not quite heavy enough to really warrant, being a great defensive Bakugan. It's still decent. It has a little bit of size to it. I mean, you can see it's, kind of wide. Takes up a decent bit of the card in a vertical position there. That's nice. And you do get a couple of cross pieces that are pretty low to the ground. One, again, kind of acting as an anchor. It's not bad, it's just not great. So I still think it's worth putting in C tier, but I don't want to put it any higher than that. Next up we have Ikitosen, but also at the top of C tier, Shibuzeku. These, I'm going to go ahead and cover both of these at the same time, because they're kind of functionally similar. They can both have metal soul pieces, which is nice. Beyond that, they are pretty terrible physically. And their skill arm, since they are Bakugan Armor's Bakugan, kind of just gets outclassed. Ikitosen has ×2. This basically allows you to get whatever gate bonus you're using from the attribute arm, in this case Chaos, twice. Plus Wind gives you the Ventus gate bonus in addition to your attribute arm, in this case Ventus, so you get the Ventus bonus twice in that sense. They're actually pretty good G-Power battlers, Ikitosen being 750 Gs, Shibuzeku maxing out 740, although that is the lowest max G-Power in armors, but still 740, 750, they're both good. It's just that they're terrible physically and their ability is outclassed, so them being high in G-Power doesn't really do a whole lot when there's other Bakugan in armors that are the same G-Power or higher, and have, a better ability that just directly outclasses both of them, so because of that, they're gonna have to stay in C tier for me personally. Now we have B tier. B tier actually has some pretty good stuff. This is where the Bakugan are actually usable as well. While obviously they might not be your first choices, again, depending on what you have, what you want to spend on, there are some things here that are actually really good options, and depending on what kind of deck you're making, some things here are actually great to use. So let's go ahead and start with the bottom of B tier, which we have Goon Icarus. Goon Icarus is very much a borderline Bakugan. I pretty easily could have dropped this thing down to C tier if I wanted to, but has two cross pieces. I kind of just like how it opens. It very much, has a lot of, parts flaring out, which I think is good, since you're probably going to use it for attack. It's not a great reason to put this in B tier, but I just personally think it's enough to do it. It also does give it a little bit of extra defense/occupancy once it's opened, if you just, land it without attacking anything, so it's decent. I think it's at least worthy of being in B tier. Now we have Dagger Otis. Dagger Otis is just a big Bakugan. You got two cross pieces right there, which is nice. They're lower to the ground as well. And yeah, it's just large. It takes up a good amount of the card from straight on. It's nothing fancy, it's not a phenomenal defense occupancy Bakugan, but it is still good, so you could definitely get by with using Dagger Otis. Next is Tornado. Tornado is actually our first 36mm Bakugan on this list. 36mm Bakugan have an inherent advantage of being larger, giving them just innate extra bulk and a little bit of extra weight as well. Tornado is just another big Bakugan. Takes up a pretty decent amount of the card, and its gimmick allows it to kind of rotate, which it basically just gets to the 45-degree mark before it just starts to spin itself, but it can still at least help with deflecting attacks. It kinda works, and that plus being a big Bakugan just makes it actually decent. Again, I don't think it's the best defensive Bakugan out there, so I'm not putting it, in high B tier or above that, but it still at least gets to be in B tier. Next is LeShao Falco. This thing is really just carried by its size. Has a little bit of extra metal down here at the feet, opens up to be pretty big. The weight is kinda higher up though, unfortunately, but still has parts that flare out, has a tail that is fairly long, which is nice, I guess. I don't think it's as good as Van Falco's tail though, but it's just big, has some attack potential. It has these holes up here that are meant to kind of make it fast, apparently. That was the whole gimmick of this thing, was to be fast, which is kind of stupid, but yeah, I guess it is kind of aerodynamic, so it's something. But it is just kind of an okay attacker that has extra size due to being a 36mm Bakugan, which does kind of, in my opinion, carry it up to B tier. Now we go to an old Bakugan, Keelan Lannis. This thing actually holds up pretty well. Keelan Lannis has one crosspiece on the back, but the underneath has this big metal strip, so this does help with its consistency and rolling very straight, which is nice. But also, it just keeps this Bakugan on the card, because all of the weight is lower. You can also sacrifice some of the weight to put a rubber crosspiece on the tail here to really add some friction to add to its defense. The only thing holding this thing back is that it's not as heavy as other defensive Bakugan, and its occupancy is a bit lackluster. It's not terrible, just not great, so I don't really want to put it any higher than low B tier, but it is still solid enough to make it into B tier for sure. Next is Cal Lucan. Cal Lucan is pretty unique because these crossparts here are actually interesting. When closed, they're actually kind of at a diagonal angle, so I'll show you that. So when they close, you can kind of see how they go downwards more, which is unique. And this is one of two Bakugan like this, so what that means is that this thing can slot into some pretty weird places. It gets more unique movement opposed to a lot of other Bakugan, which is nice and can be very good for double stands. It's not a very big Bakugan either, and none of the parts flare out very powerfully, so it just works as a really nice double stand Bakugan. Next, we have quite a few Bakugan actually, so we'll have Destroy Municus, Zero Municus, Hollow Municus, and the best of them in my opinion, Let's Go. So these Bakugan all kind of do the same thing, it's just that I feel like each Municus got better, and I think Let's Go is better than all three of them. All of them have soul pieces, all of them have cross pieces, so yeah, 4 metal pieces, they're meant to be curve shot Bakugan, which does generally prefer soul pieces though. I think Destroy Municus is actually the best when it comes to just being a regular attacker of these bunch. I'd say maybe Let's Go also has that, but Destroy Municus, it curve shots pretty well, can just attack straight on if you want to do that as well, but it is meant to curve shot. I think Zero Municus is weaker for attacking straight on, but is a better curve shot Bakugan than Destroy Municus. Hollow Municus, I actually think is not that great for attacking straight on, but is the best curve shot Bakugan here. The problem is, are curve shots actually worth doing over straight shots for attack? I don't really know if I would agree with that. There's definitely times when you want to use that, but I feel like the amount of straight shot Bakugan that are just better kinda makes this an awkward niche to use, but it is still good to use, and if you're going to use it, Hollow Municus is really good for it. That said, I think Let's Go is the best overall. It has the best potential for straight shots in my opinion, maybe being slightly better than Destroy Municus or on the same level, but it actually curve shots shockingly well. In my opinion, it's even better than Destroy Municus and Zero Municus. I don't know if it's quite to the same level as Hollow Municus, but I don't think it's far off either. And when you have some utility to kind of switch to straight shots if you want to me, I think that makes it better than any of these three. But regardless, it is just kind of a weird niche, and I wanted to just cover all of them at the same time since they are kind of similar. Next is Borg Mahesis. Borg Mahesis is like Kalukin, where these parts are kind of diagonal. You got the two cross pieces there. But I think this thing is just better physically. It's much larger, which I think gives it some good defensive utility. These parts back here actually can hit against the ground to get some extra defense as well. This thing actually works as a pretty decent defense occupancy Bakugan, plus you can roll it in unique ways to allow it to kind of maneuver through different gate cards and kind of a messy field to get it to where it needs to be. Plus, nothing here is overly strong offensively, so I think you could still slot it in for double stance if you want to, though it's not as good as some other Bakugan, but it can still have some use for that. Overall, I do just like this thing for what it can do. So it's kind of a weird rolling Bakugan. I think it is one of the better ones. Next is Sea Slug. Sea Slug has 3 metal pieces. You can have them here and on either side there, which is pretty helpful. And this thing is fairly bulky and low to the ground, which is pretty nice overall. Just having 3 metal pieces makes it a good attacker, and again, being low to the ground, having some bulk on it, I think just makes it a good Bakugan. Always good to have a bit of extra utility. Next is Blandshout. Blandshout also has 3 pieces. You have the one here, and then the 2 on the sides here. This thing also opens up pretty interestingly, like this part really pops up, which I feel like gives it just some extra attack power in addition to having 3 metal pieces, so this thing just works really well as an attacker. I think it opens up and stops itself pretty well for critical KOs. So this is just a really strong attack Bakugan. Next, we have a couple more Bakugan to cover at the same time. We have, of course, Flare Dragon, and above it, Gren Dragon. These two are around a similar spot. You have 4 metal pieces for each. You can have the soul pieces and, of course, the cross pieces. That works. However, for Gren Dragon, the arms pop out just a little bit more. And when you're rolling it, there's actually kind of a line, well, 2 lines that kind of go around Gren Dragon, which make it roll straight. So it just has a couple extra bits over Flare Dragon. But both of them are just solid attack Bakugan that have 4 metal pieces. That will always be good, maybe not great, but good in BakuTech. So they're both very usable Bakugan. Next is a pretty underrated Bakugan in my opinion. Gavleanicon. Gavleanicon is a weird one. So this only has 2 cross pieces here and also the tail. However, the feet are built in metal pieces, so it does have 4 metal pieces. That makes it a pretty good attacker, but also this thing kind of really just juts out, which you can roll backwards if you want to use that as an attack, which is pretty nice actually. But also, it's very low to the ground. The 2 feet are touching the ground, this head is fairly low all things considered, and the tail is touching the ground. You can also spec more into defense and actually put a rubber cross piece on the back if you want to use it like that. Though personally, I prefer just having 4 metal pieces. Personally, I think it has an edge over Gren Dragon and Flare Dragon, but it is definitely questionable. I just personally prefer it a little bit. Next is Hammer Cannon. Hammer Cannon has 2 cross pieces here. You have a built-in metal tail, which is nice, and then this front part that is also metal and, you know, springs forward, which is really nice. I think the metal distribution on this thing is really good. It's 4 metal pieces as well, so similar to what we've seen before, but also the hammer, it does push out. It doesn't have a very strong spring. If it had a strong spring, this thing would be easily A tier, but it can still help to push a Bakugan off the card if you hit it and at least get it destabilized, so it does have a bit of extra utility, which is why I put it above the other 3, but it's still just slightly better than them. And at the absolute top of B tier, we have Ogan Hawo. Ogan Hawo is a really good Bakugan. I don't think it's quite A tier, but it is a B tier. This thing can't have 2 metal soul pieces here, but also the arms are by far the heaviest arms in Bakugan armors. It's essentially like having 4 convert pieces, although these might actually be a little bit heavier than just having cross pieces. So it's already good as is, but then you also have Plus Light. Plus Light is outclassed as it's just adding the Chaos bonus, and in stock here it's just getting the Chaos bonus twice effectively, but still, that does make it a good G-Power battler on top of the Potential 760 Gs this thing can have, which is the second highest in armors. Unfortunately, the armor's ability is still outclassed by Free Select, but it is still good to have. So, physically, I think this thing is at least on par with like the Dragoons. I think I might prefer Gavlet, Anaconda, and Hammer Cannon over this thing by a bit, but it definitely has some good G-Power battling capabilities, so personally I think it is the top of B tier. I just don't think it's quite A tier personally though. Now we have A tier. Even if these Bakugan aren't top tier, they're still really, really good, and depending on the deck you're making, some of these are going to be very important for those decks. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. So at the bottom of A tier we have Rekka Hiryu. Rekka Hiryu can have 2 metal pieces here on the feet and also has these 2 metal blades. It's not quite as good as 4 traditional metal pieces, but it's still a decent attacker at least. The reason why it's so high is because of its armor ability, plus 100. Unlike most other G-Power based abilities and armors, this one does not have any gate card interaction. Gate cards can be a little bit questionable, you don't know what you're going to land on sometimes, and things we've already seen, like plus light, plus wind times 2, can be very rewarding, but commonly just don't really give you a whole lot. Plus 100 just gives you a flat plus 100 Gs. Paired with this thing having 750 Gs in base, this thing effectively just has 850 Gs. So even though it's just a decent attacker, having 850 Gs confirmed is really scary. It's not the strongest G-Power battler out there technically, but that does make it really good and definitely warrants being in A tier. Next up, Giga Horus. Giga Horus is a pretty good attacker. I mean, you got 6 metal pieces across this thing, you kind of slide them to change up the performance of it. They can kind of move and you make it kind of roll awkwardly, which is cool. There's no like massive differences, but having a weight shift is still nice. The metal pieces aren't that big, but again, with the bulk of 36mm Bakugan, this thing just ends up being pretty good. It's also pretty large, so it just has some general tankiness with it. So it just ends up being a good and bulky attacker. It's not great, but I do think it's still enough to warrant A tier, as that is just kind of the privilege of these specific Bakugan. Next up is Shield Leonis. I really wish the thing was a little bit wider. If this thing could have just been a little bigger, or if it was a 36mm Bakugan, this thing would be insane. Unfortunately, the occupancy on this thing is just kind of okay, but it has 3 metal pieces, all of which touch the ground. This thing can be kind of a menace with 4 pieces. Even with metal pieces, it's very much weighted down. You could do a mix of them with rubber on the tail, the other 2 are metal, or the inverse of that. This thing is just very, very good defensively. It just doesn't have quite enough occupancy for it to be genuinely crazy, but it is still really good at least. Now we have an awkward one, which is Bujin Dragon. I wasn't sure if I should even count this, but Bujin is a unique piece, so it should probably count. If you put the head down, this thing's actually a pretty decent defensive Bakugan. I mean, Bujin has wings touching the ground, its tail touching the ground, has some bulk to it, has a little bit of attack potential as well, fairly high G-Power. This thing is definitely good and warrants A tier, but it's just worse than Dragon Dragon and Never Really Possible, so it's not actually worth using, but it's good enough to where it is still A tier. Definitely a weird one to rank, but I wanted to include it anyway. Next is Tri-Falco. Tri-Falco has 3 different modes. You have this more defensive mode, you have kind of an occupancy mode, both of which are pretty solid. Nice to have the option for either one. You also have a smaller mode, which can be used for double stance, also low G setups, which has 180 Gs, which is actually the lowest normal G-Power Bakugan you can get. We'll get to that in a little bit. So having a low G utility, good defense, with some different options to kind of spec into more pure defense or occupancy, but the more defensive mode is still just wide enough to actually make it work. This thing just does a lot. Also, there is this weird thing on the back here. I actually kind of like this. I think you can get some interesting rolling patterns out of that, but a lot of people don't like it, so there is a red version. I'm not really going into variants in this video, but that version doesn't have it, which is nice for people who don't want it, but I think the bump can actually add some interesting rolling stuff, like I said. Overall, this thing just has quite a few options and works really well because of that. Next is Saint Aquis. Saint Aquis is pretty similar to Tri-Falco. Yeah, two modes. You got this mode, and you have the kind of smaller mode, which kind of, again, is similar to Trifalco, just doesn't have a defensive mode. In the small mode, it also has low Gs, although it's not as low as Trifalco. It's 200 Gs instead of 180. But I still think this thing's better overall, because while you do have the metal soul pieces, you also have two cross pieces, making this thing actually a pretty solid attack Bakugan. I don't think it's quite better than the Dragoons, but I'd probably put it right below them. So having good attack, with also solid defense and occupancy, and potential low G setups, which can also slot into double stands, I think, you know what, this thing actually has a lot going for it. I think it's A tier, and better than Trifalco. So overall, it is definitely a pretty good Bakugan. Next up, we have Daifujo and Acro Gizzard. Daifujo, just flip the switch here because you want to have this in the lower mode, which, as you can see, that works pretty well. So yeah, these two, they're just occupancy Bakugan. Being kind of these very large occupancy Bakugan, though, is it also doubles as defense. Because when you're so massive and also just really low to the ground, you're hard to move, which is why these types of Bakugan are so good. Now, Daifujo, I think, has a bit more width, which actually can help for occupancy, but Acro Gizzard is a bit longer, also does have two cross pieces, so can add a bit of extra weight. Daifujo was supposed to have a cross piece, but they kind of decided to super glue it in, so you can't use it as a cross piece. It was likely a last minute decision before it left the factory. There is a recolor that does allow it to actually use its cross piece though, so that's I guess an option. But for this video, I'm treating it as if it doesn't have one, although I don't think it actually moves its position, personally. I think Acro Gizzard is just a bit better. It is definitely bigger than Daifujo, but Daifujo is still a really good option. Both are great occupancy Bakugan, and also far less expensive than the better ones, so they're very good to get. Now we have Ogre Leonis. Ogre Leonis is a decent-sized Bakugan. You know, its occupancy is okay. It's also very bulky, giving it some good defense. But also, you have this metal piece here, you got the metal piece on the tail, opens up to be pretty large, so it has some pretty good attack. It just has solid attack, solid defense, just overall a bulky Bakugan. It's a 36mm Bakugan as well, which really adds to it, so you can do a lot with this thing, so I think it is A tier overall. You definitely can get quite a bit out of it. Now for one of the funniest Bakugan on this list, we have Bone Skulls. Bone Skulls is strange. You have a cross piece up here, you also have a strip of metal going underneath, which makes this thing very nice to roll as it has just a consistent, you know, ring of metal effectively. As an attacker, it is okay because of that. It has a bit of extra pop-out force because how long it is. Defensively, it's decent. Also has quite a bit of occupancy, which makes it pretty nice as well. But yeah, physically, it is just kind of decent all around, in my opinion. I'd probably put it in mid-B tier, potentially, or low B tier. However, it has one special feature that puts it all the way up in A tier. And that is its gate card. Now, I know I said I wasn't going to talk about gate cards. I said there was going to be one exception, and this was the exception. Bone Skulls has a low G-Wins gate card, which isn't special on its own, but that gate card will set Bone Skulls to 0 Gs. 0 Gs on a lowest G-Wins gate card. It's an auto-win for Bone Skulls. So it is a very funny card to use on a Bakugan that's actually pretty decent overall, so I think this thing actually does warrant A tier. Next is, of course, Dio Civic plus Savic. This Bakugan is something else. In my BakuTech misconceptions video, I had to go on for like 8 minutes about how to use this thing, so I'm not getting into all that here, but you got two cross pieces, you got these metal parts up here, and Savic goes inside, so this thing's actually pretty heavy, works well as an attacker. Savic can be a little bit awkward to use, but it can potentially give this thing extra G power. There is a blue version that has 700 Gs, with Savic having 220 Gs. Potentially can allow this thing to be 920 Gs, which is relevant as that is a very high number. This thing can certainly be a very powerful G-Power battler, along with actually being a really solid attacker. Plus, it does have a bit of extra defensive utility. It's not a defense Bakugan, it just has these parts touching the ground. Also, the tail touching the ground makes it harder to push back, which is nice. So having that is always good, and yeah, overall, it just works really well. Above that, we got Rise Dragon, a classic Bakugan. This thing has one cross piece on the back here, its horn, so it doesn't have a ton of weight going for it, but it has enough to at least make this thing usable. However, it just pops out. The tail can give it a bit of extra momentum, the wings really just come upwards, these arms push out, the head really pushes up with the horn there. Everything just really flares out on this thing. Has a ton of pop-up force because of that, which works very well, and makes this thing a really strong attacker, and it is still very viable to this day. Next up, G Ganorada. G Ganorada is weird. I went back and forth on whether or not to put G Ganorada or Rise Dragon above one another, but ultimately I chose G Ganorada above Rise Dragon. This thing has 2 cross pieces up here, which they are higher up unfortunately, but doesn't matter too much on this thing. Also, they are positioned very nicely when closed to make this thing very consistent for rolling. And overall, as an attacker, it is very solid. However, it has the gravity ring, which pretty much just plants down when it opens, allowing it to plant on a critical KO, which is very important because one of the biggest issues when trying to critical KO a Bakugan is basically you can fly off the card pretty easily. You can fall over, then it just counts as a knockout, not a critical KO. Having something designed to kind of stop the Bakugan is very helpful, making this thing very consistent and good. Plus, if you're on a card, this also gives it some extra defensive utility. It's not big enough to be an actual defense Bakugan, but it is pretty hard to critical KO this thing because of that. So it just has a lot going for it and is a really good Bakugan to use. Now we have Size-Tavenol and Sex-Tavenol. These two are both great. They both have 4 soul pieces and 2 cross pieces. They have 6 metal pieces. These things are crazy. They are bowling balls, effectively, so they're good for attack, and they're also decently big, so they have okay occupancy, and they're also pretty defensive because of just how tanky they can be. I mean, they are tied for being the 2nd highest Bakugan in the game, so obviously they're going to have some pretty good bulk to go with that. As far as why Sex is above Size, basically I think Size-Tavenol has the better physical form. I prefer how the arms open opposed to the wings, but it's still pretty marginal overall, and I don't think the pop-up force matters too much with these. But Sex-Tavenol can be any attribute, which is just really useful. It can slot in any team in any way that you want, at least the original versions like that. But there are different versions for every single attribute, so there's that as well. Whereas Size-Tavenol is locked to Darkus, and Darkus is great, but that also means the competition is quite steep for this thing. They're both incredible Bakugan, but I do think Sex-Tavenol is just slightly better than Size-Tavenol because of that utility. And at the very top of A tier, we have Made Last Boss. Made Last Boss has 2 metal pieces down here and then 1 decent sized one here. This is actually a shockingly heavy Bakugan for what it is. It's a good attacker, has some decent defensive utility, it is kind of bulky, and again, it is decently heavy as well. But also this thing can kind of roll in a lot of different ways. The back part here can be turned in 8 different ways, which can allow you to do like, curve shots or just straight shots, get some other weird movements in kind of different ways. Kind of does what some of those curve shot Bakugan do that I mentioned earlier in like B tier, but I think this can just do a lot more, and it's also just a good attacker in general, plus has some extra bulk. To me, this thing is just really, really good. Also, it has 720 Gs. It's a good G-Power battler as well. There's just a lot to do with Made Last Boss, so I think it ends up being really good. And that will finish off A tier. Next is A plus tier. When I first drafted this video, this tier didn't actually exist. These were just the top 6 Bakugan of A tier. But I feel like they're all kind of interesting. These feel better than the rest of A tier to me personally, though I don't think they're quite top tier, so I didn't put them in S tier. So starting off, we have Kachiagel. Kachiagel is a really good Bakugan. First up, you do have the 1 convert piece in the back, which is helpful and also gives it a little extra attack, which is nice. The main thing is the head. This thing opens up like this, and with a tail, lets it kind of move forward, furthering how strong this attack is. It's just really good. You get a ton of pop-out force in this thing, so it's a pretty insane attacker in my opinion. Similarly, we have Buddha-Gil. Buddha-Gil also has strong points. You have the neck here, also the tail, plus you have the 2 soul pieces here. This thing's really good for curve shots, and when curve shotting, it opens up and just delivers a very strong attack. I personally feel like it's a little bit more consistent than Kachiagel, so I'm putting it above Kachiagel, but they're both really close. You could argue Kachiagel's above this, but I personally prefer Buddha-Gil just a little bit more. They're both insane and just have ridiculous pop-out force though. Above them is Barry Beyond. This thing is a defensive Bakugan. The reason it's not S tier is because it's not huge, so you can get around it, but this thing will just lock down part of a card. You just do not get across this very well. You can technically brute force under it and like kind of open, but that's more so gonna force a G-Power battle rather than just crit KO this thing. You might want that, but depending on what card it's on, that can be a pretty big risk, and then this thing could just potentially beat you anyway. That said, it is still very good at locking down cards, very good at defending a card. Now you can aim for like one of these sides to knock it over to, you know, potentially crit KO out on your next turn, but it still does take up a turn. And by that point, it could already be too late. You know, you could potentially have another Bakugan on that turn landing on the card to give them a double stand, which is probably what they want. But yeah, this thing is kind of insane. It just has some counterplay, so I don't think it's quite S tier. Now we have Kappa Kodaku. Kappa Kodaku is one of the few armor Bakugan that's actually pretty good physically. Has these two metal claws here, and you can see it does kind of block off part of the card pretty well there. It's wide enough to be a solid defense Bakugan. Nothing great, just solid. But it also has a really good ability called O-Raid. O-Raid allows you to pick up a card and move it to another spot on the field as long as one of these sides matches up with another side of a card. This can allow you to move it further away from yourself to kind of use it to block an opponent's Bakugan, or you can move it closer to yourself to just try and give yourself a super easy double stand, or you can just use it for other repositioning uses. You can try to block your other cards. There's a lot you can do with O-Raid. It's not useful 100% of the time though, so I don't think it's quite S tier, but it is definitely worth being in A+ tier. The runner-up of this tier is Nino de Shao. Nino de Shao is a strange one. This is a double-sided Bakugan. But with this, one side's good, one side's bad. The other mode is terrible, has absolutely zero use. It's kind of to balance this thing out, I guess. In this mode though, it is absolutely insane. Basically, it opens up and just has a ton of force. You can see just doing that makes it jump forward. If this was the only mode that Nino de Shao had, this thing would be the best attacker in the game, no questions asked, and it would be in the highest tier in this video. It's just held back by the other magnet being bad. That said, you can learn magnet positioning, you can effectively manipulate how often you get this side, but even if you're good with magnet positioning, there is still a risk of getting the other mode. Because of that, I feel like I can't put this in top tier, but I am comfortable putting this thing in A+ tier because of how potentially insane this thing can be. And for the top of A+ tier, Windmill. Windmill is a menace to society. You have two soul pieces and these three blades here. This thing ends up being a really strong attacker, and it has its own unique style of curve shot. This thing can be really hard to use, which is why it's not top tier, but the max potential of Windmill is ridiculous. I don't think it's stronger than the two Bakugan I have in top tier, but it's definitely third and I'd say on par with them if used correctly. But also, because of how weirdly this thing moves, it can also just be hard to deal with. So it has a bit of extra utility. The problem is that it's really difficult to get used to, really hard to actually learn. And the other Bakugan are just good enough to where, do you really want to bother learning this thing? Probably not. But the potential is there, and it can be very rewarding to just wreak havoc. So it is still a ridiculous attacker. I still think it has top tier attack potential. It's just so awkward that I don't feel comfortable putting it that high. This thing is still absolutely ridiculous though. And now we have S tier. Technically this isn't the highest tier in this video, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Regardless, this is still top tier in my opinion. So scraping into our top tier, we have Yodan Shifor. Yodan Shifor is a weird Bakugan. It's a really good occupancy Bakugan, obviously, plus it has other modes. One of them is pretty small, which can be good for double stands, has good utility. I just don't think it warrants being nearly as high as the other two top tier occupancy Bakugan, but it is still a top tier occupancy Bakugan. It's not significantly better than something like Acro Wizard for occupancy in particular, but having the utility it does definitely does put it above stuff like that and into top tier. Next up, Zeta Municus. Zeta Municus is a solid attacker, has the metal feet here, can curve shot. It's just kind of a solid Bakugan physically. It's kind of bulky as well. Nothing crazy, maybe like B tier. But what makes it top tier is its G-Power battling capabilities. You can get a 730G version of this, which is really good. Also Zeta Roulette. Can put it somewhere between 740 and 770Gs typically, but you'd have the 1 in 8 chance of being at 930Gs, the highest possible G power without cards. This being one of the best G power battlers out there, either first or second, not counting armors, and actually being pretty solid physically, I think it warrants being in top tier. Next is Hadokayo. This thing has the 2 metal soul pieces and is absolutely abysmal physically. That said, it has its armor ability called Blow Away. When you land on a card, you can point to one of your opponent's Bakugan that is stood on a card, and they have to put it back in their hand. This can just clear defense occupancy Bakugan from the field. It's kind of ridiculous how broken this ability is. The only reasons why this thing is not even higher on this list is because once you do that, you're kind of just sitting there waiting to get crit KO'd. Now, you can of course set up to try and avoid that, but yeah, Blow Away is just absolutely ridiculous, and it doesn't matter how terrible this thing is physically, it has to be top tier. Next up we have Go-Garyu and Sanzu Halabos. These two are, in my opinion, the 2 best attackers in the game. I personally prefer Sanzu Halabos to Go-Garyu slightly, but I think most people prefer the inverse. It's really close, you can go either way on these. I just personally think Sanzu Halabos is a little better. So for Go-Garyu, basically you have these 4 metal blades, you also have a metal horn. This head has decent power, not as good as like Kachiagel, but still pretty good. It's a big Bakugan as well. This thing just has a lot of pop-out force going for it and is decently heavy, just has some good bulk to it. It's a really strong attacker. Sanzu Halabos doesn't have much pop-out force, but it is just so heavy. The distance between the Tavenals and the 3rd heaviest Bakugan is a pretty decent gap, but the gap between Sanzu Halabos and the Tavenals is even bigger. This thing is ridiculous. Has these metal soul pieces, has 3 cross pieces, and also these 3 horns, also being a 36mm Bakugan, is just naturally heavier. This thing is just an absolute tank of a Bakugan. It has okay occupancy. It's actually pretty good defensively because it's just so heavy. I mean, you wouldn't want to use it as a defensive Bakugan, it's just good to have that utility. But this thing can just steamroll other Bakugan, it's kind of ridiculous. Both of these are, without a doubt, in my opinion, the 2 best attackers in the game overall. Now we have S+ tier. S+ tier is just like the top half of top tier, but these all just feel like they have a little bit extra that warrants putting them just a bit higher than normal. And these will be the top 5 Bakugan in all of BakuTech. Yasha Tagaris. You got the metal soul pieces here, and it is a pretty bad Bakugan physically. Doesn't really do much of anything, so why is it so good? Well, free select. Free select allows you to choose a second attribute bonus. Things like plus light, plus wind ×2 are invalidated by this. You also aren't locked to gambling on 1 attribute or maybe 2 for coverage. You get your base attribute bonus, in this case it's Darkest, which is already the best attribute, and you just get to choose a second one. Oh, also this thing's 770Gs in base, which is the highest base G power in all of BakuTech and Bakugan armors. And you combine that with something that can just take the highest bonus every time. There are ways to beat this thing, but it is extremely difficult. On your own cards, this thing is an auto win, assuming you made your deck correctly. On opponent's cards, there are hyper-specific scenarios where they can beat you, but those are very rare, and you're still more than likely going to win. This thing is borderline invincible in G-Power battles. It's kind of ridiculous. I don't care how bad this thing is physically, it is without a doubt the best G-Power battler in the game, and it has to be in S+ tier. Next up, we have Jaibafudo. Jaibafudo is a defense Bakugan. It's not huge, but it's big enough to make its defense work. But the whole thing, of course, is that it has the second magnet in the tail, which just makes this thing like really difficult to actually move. It just plants itself, and there's not a whole lot you could do. And again, it's big enough to where it's hard to work around as well. You have enough occupancy on a pure defense Bakugan that is also the best defense Bakugan in the game. So, it is S+ tier. Above that, we have Nagadaja. Nagadaja is massive, as you can see. I'll have to put it sideways. This thing's just huge. It's also decently wide as well. I mean, it just takes up too much of the card. It is a massive occupancy Bakugan. I think in terms of pure occupancy, it's the best Bakugan in that category. Also, like I said, it's kind of wide, which makes it pretty good for defense. Also, being as low to the ground as it is, yeah, this thing's a great defensive Bakugan. It's kind of just a wall. It's very hard to crit KO, and it's hard to land on the same card as it. Again, S+ tier Bakugan. Now we have another kind of debatable one, that is Ozpress as the second best Bakugan in BakuTech. This thing is another great occupancy Bakugan, it definitely warrants being in top tier. Has a rubber band here, which is decent for defense. It's not perfect, Bakugan can't trip over it, but at the same time, between having it and not having it, would you want it? Yes, you want it, so it's still nice to have. Also, with this thing and how it opens, it can actually kind of just like push Bakugan around. You probably won't crit KO like really good defense Bakugan, but if you have some weaker Bakugan, defensively this thing can actually crit KO them. If you slam into them as if you were trying to crit KO them, it can destabilize them and then push them off the card. This isn't perfect, it's not like a great attacker, it's like B tier, maybe even C tier, but it is still attack utility that something like this probably doesn't need. It's really not in need of any attack when it's already a top tier defense occupancy Bakugan. Also, when you're opening, because you roll at the same time in Gachi, this thing can actually just push things off of the card before they open, just kind of deflecting them. So you just have some extra utility that I think is really good on a Bakugan that is, I would say, is the second best defense occupancy Bakugan behind Nagadaja. And while you don't have the best pure occupancy like that does, I think getting extra utility that can be problematic for your opponent, to me, warrants putting this thing above it, and ends up being the second best Bakugan in the game. And finally, the best Bakugan in BakuTech, it's Gigan Dragon. This isn't really a surprise. So you have this medal here, which is nice, got a little medal in the back here as well. This thing is really good. As an attacker, I would say it's somewhere between 3rd and 5th. It's definitely a top tier attacker. It's not better than Sanzu Halibos or Go Garyu for sure, and I think Windmill is technically better than it, and I also think the good side of Nino Shao is definitely better than it, but those two are weird, so you could argue it's a 3rd best attacker because it's more consistent than those. I think it's better than everything else though. With the head down and the wings down, this thing ends up being a really, really good defense occupancy Bakugan. I don't think it's top tier, but I think it's high tier. I think you'd probably put it above Acro Gizzard and Daifujo, so it's really good still. Also, it's one of the few Bakugan that's not locked to one attribute. It can be Pyrus or Darkus, the two best attributes in the game, so you get a little bit extra versatility there. And if you have the correct setup, you can have a 750G version of this, meaning that it could be the best Bakugan outside of Armors in terms of G-Power battling. Zeta Unicus is technically stronger, but I would argue you could put this as number 1 over it. Because the max potential of both of them, well, Gigan beats Zeta 4 of 8 times, they tie 2 of 8 times, and Gigan only loses 2 of 8 times. Yes, again, it has that crazy potential to go to 770 or 930, but having that consistent 750Gs is just really strong. When you have that nice attribute versatility, on top of being a really, really strong G-Power battler, a strong defense occupancy Bakugan, and a top tier attacker, all in one Bakugan, this thing is ridiculous. You could argue this thing needs its own tier, honestly, with how good it is. But I opted to just leave it in S+ tier at number 1. It's the best Bakugan in the game. It can do pretty much anything you could ever want. And there you have it, my BakuTech tier list. This video took quite a long time to make, but I finally did it. I was finally happy with my placements, so hopefully this was a good tier list. I've been meaning to make it for a long time. 5 years, actually probably closer to 6 years at this point. I would have made it a few months ago, but I decided to hold off on it specifically because I wanted this video to be up on July 7th of 2025. Why? Because my first big order of BakuTech that really launched all of my BakuTech stuff on this channel came in on July 7th, 2015, so it's kind of my 10-year anniversary getting my initial BakuTech stuff to really launch all this. So I thought it'd be cool to have a special video for it, and this is definitely a special video. Hopefully after editing this video is under an hour. I don't have much hope for that, but we'll see. Maybe we'll get lucky and it is. But that's all for the tier list. Hopefully the placements make sense. I also have links in the description for some playlists. You can look through those if there's anything you want to know more about. I'll have the whole BakuTech review playlist down there. Also on my Bakugan discussion playlist down there. There are some regular Bakugan videos, but there are a lot of BakuTech videos, especially later in the playlist, and some of those will explain other things about BakuTech, like misconceptions video, or like the budget video for anything here that is good, but also accessible. So anyway, that's all for this video, so thanks for watching, and bye-bye.